comes to your content strategy, you want to start with your primary business goal. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to promote? What is the metric that you're using to determine whether or not you're going to be successful or not? But ultimately, what are we trying to do here, right? Am I trying to promote an event? Am I trying to promote awareness? Am I trying to promote knowledge? Am I trying to have people click here so they can sign up for an email list? What is it we're trying to do? When you're setting your content strategy, you want to set the baseline. You want to say, I start from here. Because if you, say, hired me to help, promote Starkweather Association services, we'd want to start with the baseline, because I want to say, right now you're performing at this level. And then we'd want to be able to show that we can move the needle and increase that performance.
So if I can point some out to you, Paul, this right here, I think, is where a lot of our clients get stuck, is that, we'll say, are you using Google Analytics? And they'll say, yeah, we've got the plugin. If they've got a WordPress site, maybe they got Yoast. If they're on your membership, they've got it connected to your membership admin console. So they can say, yes, we've got the Google Analytics tags in all of our pages. So we've got that. But that's where I think most of our folks stop, because they don't have this deeper level of expertise to say, how do I use this to get a result? It's like a passive experience. I'm watching what's happening, and they're not seeing that, oh, no, you can actually act on what's happening to change what is happening. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And I think that's sort of part of the dilemma, is that you've got these great tools that are typically free. You can get a lot of data, a lot of information about what you're doing, and whether you're doing the Yoast plugin or you're looking at some general analytics in sort of a content management system, or you're looking at something through Google Analytics itself, you're sort of overwhelmed with what you're looking at. And you kind of don't know, yes, you can see information, but you don't know where the dial is to change this or change that. And so because you don't know how this machine kind of works, you're just randomly looking at things. And one of the first things that we do, and again, another conversation another day, one of the first things I do when I set up a Google Analytics account is I make sure I know what the boss wants to see. I set up their view, but I set it up after I set up a generic view, so I have all the data. So I, in SEO, want to see all the data, and then, hey, what do you want to see? And I make sure I get that information available so I can begin to train the executive leaders and the folks who have the decision-making authority. Here's the data you want to see, right? Because what we don't want to have happen is essentially someone with limited time kind of going under the hood and kind of getting lost down some pathway, right?
Well we've seen that.
Yeah. Browser XYZ of version XYZ of this operating system is only showing this type of result. Please explain to me why that is.
Yeah.
Because people aren't using IE anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I'm thinking about one of the situations we ran into with a client, great client, really active and involved volunteer leadership. And the volunteer leadership knew enough about how to get into Google Analytics to get themselves freaked out, because they were wondering what the heck happened to our site traffic. And if I remember correctly, you had to go in and sort of diagnose what were they looking at to come back and educate them on, well, really truly in order to see the trends, you need another, you tell the story, but another view, a scope view.
Right. You were looking at too narrow of a data set to understand what was happening.
Right.
And you begin to extrapolate from it, well, then something serious is going on here. Well, actually, this is what's happening.
Yeah, there was enough information there to get them to spin up and be really worried.
Mm-hmm.
But then that gave us an opportunity to provide a little bit of baseline education to that whole leadership team.
That's right. And like with anything you're doing, you want to make sure that you're presenting the information to what that person needs at that time. And whether it's executive leadership or volunteer leadership or a marketing manager or, the events coordinator, you need to understand what they need to see. Mm-hmm. And what Google Analytics can provide you is a really good look at that information so that you can make sure you're looking at the same data the same way. And it's really hard, by the way. I just want to kind of make this point. It's really hard to set a baseline. People want to start wherever they want to start, and you need to have everyone agree that we're going to start looking at this information this way. Because if you don't have a baseline, you have nothing to compare to. And so everything just becomes magic, right? So what I'll typically do is I'll spend, a month or so just looking at the data, talking to the people and say, hey, we're going to start measuring a dateline of X. And then that's our baseline. And then we do the steps that we take to try to move the baseline to say, am I going to increase it 5, 10, 20, 50%, or did I decrease it 5, 10, 15, 20%? And you've got to let that sort of process unfold, because you're not going to naturally hit that performance metric first time out of the gate. And when you do, it's awesome, right? But when you don't, which you typically don't, you have to kind of have that iterative process to figure out, how to make that sort of work. So setting a baseline is a lot harder than it may seem. And that's sort of, the way that we think about it with this content strategy is you've got to have the time to understand how to get the ranking and get the better results. There are organizations, there are companies, there are plenty of ads out there that will tell you they will guarantee page 1 results within a certain amount of time, and hats off to them, right? But if you really truly want to look at your content, you have to look at it from a little bit longer term perspective. You're trying to provide quality content. You're trying to install a standard. You're setting a baseline. You're setting performance so that, as we've worked with certain customers, the marketing people can prove demonstrably this data is accurate. I started with this baseline, and now because of our social media campaign, look, we have 100 new signups or whatever the result is.
Right.
And, again, part of a content strategy that I typically recommend is that we use SEO to help our content. So when I think about putting something online, I'm always asking, what is the SEO that goes into this? And then I make sure before I release it, did I check those items off? Did I put this tag in a certain place? Did I make sure I've got a natural flowing, language? And so then when I release it, I know, okay, great, I've got this, right? If you have a larger organization, you might have, say, a marketing manager and then an editor, and maybe part of that editor's job is a little QA, make sure that the SEO is out there. Because it's a lot easier to get your SEO set up before you really go deep into what you're doing with that content. So I use it to structure the content. I use it as quality control. A lot harder after the content is out into the internet.
Right. Well, and you just hit on something I think is really interesting, and again, it could be a subject for a future talk, is that none of us would ever consider releasing a piece of content until, 1, we ran the spell check, and 2, we probably read it out loud to make sure it sounds like natural language, and maybe 3, have a colleague in the office read it to tell us if the thing makes sense. And you're suggesting there's a 4th step before that content goes out, and that 4th step is do an SEO check on it.
That's right. And we can set up, a very simple tool to basically use to check that SEO, and it helps with all the other things you just mentioned in terms of standard editorial review.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a checklist and you're going through it, you're just simply saying, do I see this? Do I see that? Do I see this? And then that little tool, and it's very easy to set up in Excel, can then also help guide you as you track the progress over your campaign. So again, using the analogy of SEO for associations, at some point, when we release a page called SEO for associations, I'm going to have all this information behind the scenes, and let's say it doesn't generate traffic, right? And then we go back and say, let's change this element, let's turn this knob, let's change this thing, and see if we can kind of generate results that we're hoping that we're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like it's another step and it's going to drive editors crazy, but if you can train people that are maybe not so technically proficient on how to look for it, then you're off to the races.
Yep.
With the content management system, it's even easier, because then you could train people on where are you looking to see what has been filled, what hasn't been filled.
Right.
The search engines, as I've alluded to before, they change regularly, right? Google had a very big update to its search algorithm this spring. They are set for another big update coming any day now. And that big algorithm, that change was changed in part due to the massive disruption due to the unfortunate COVID pandemic. And what Google realized is that there's going to be a lot more people online, going to be doing searches in a lot more different ways. There's going to be a lot more consumption of online content. So they use that time to go back in and tweak their algorithm. And a lot of sites had collapsed web traffic. And a lot of customers began to worry because they didn't see the web traffic. Because essentially Google began to penalize for a lack of quality and a lack of relevant results. And that definition that Google uses changes frequently, right? And because it changes frequently and we have no control over it, most search engine optimization folks are often caught flat-footed. And so the best content strategy that I recommend is audit your content performance regularly. Constantly be looking at it. So that way, if you see something that happens as a result of a Google algorithm change, you can react accordingly. It's not just a one and done, right? You don't just set it up and it's good to go. Specific strategies are going to relate to what you're actually trying to sell, promote, and those are sort of dependent on what your marketing effort and what your performance metrics will be.